So, good evening, you guys. Want to say that a few hours ago, I went to the Cinemark and they were actually showing Lawrence of Arabia. And I've actually seen this film like 10 years ago in downtown New Haven. And definitely, it is one of the greatest films ever made. And with Lawrence of Arabia, a little bit about the story of Lawrence of Arabia is this is a soldier who served in the British Army during World War One, and what happened was that, in order to fight the Ottoman Empire, the Turks were invading, Arabia and the Middle East. So with Lawrence, he was positioned to actually serve, and be involved in Arabia. And what the big thing that happened was that with a lot of the Arabs, they just didn't like modern warfare, and they weren't really trained to that. And also, they believed in tradition really, so they wanted to kind of fight the way that they wanted to fight. And so so the thing with Lawrence that made him so different was that he was very respectful of Arab culture, at a time when honestly people looked down at people and traditions from foreign cultures. What like, because there's also that famous Rudyard Kipling poem called "The White Man's Burden," and the white man's burden was really about imperialism, colonialism, and looking at foreigners as inferior, especially people who are dark skinned. You look at a lot of the you look at like how they occupied India, and they looked down at people like who were brown skinned, and definitely that attitude happened a lot at the Arabs. But there were people like Lawrence who were way ahead of their time, who believed in, if you like the culture, embrace it, but also if you have a certain like respect or maybe just interest in the culture, definitely really celebrate it. I think like the best example would also be, you look at how many people who are white who fought for black rights, from throughout like the Jim Crow era. It would be very comparable to that, really. Um, or there's people like Marlon Brando, who famously in the '70s chose not to accept his Oscar because he didn't like um, the stereotypes that he saw in the media of Native Americans. There were many people through history, not just soldiers, but just people in general, like Lawrence, who just saw other cultures as something something really awesome, and also something to also respect, really. And I think that him just embracing Arab culture and traveling through the desert, and also being a different type of person. Um, one of the big themes is that what you can accomplish if you are really respectful of other cultures, instead of just coming in and being like, okay, this is how we English fight. We know everything. We're white. We're superior. You're inferior. Um, what can you accomplish if you actually are respectful of cultures and everything like that? Really, I do think. Um, this is also a very strong film with showing the consequences of war. Um, and I want to step away a little bit from that really quick, because that Lawrence character, he's very eccentric. There's some scenes where like he's walking through, he's on horseback through the desert, and he's like singing, and he's like playing with his echo. And back then, there would be people that would say, okay, well, either you're silly or mentally ill, and stop it there, really, and just like put him in a psych ward. And then there's also him wearing his Arabian garb, and he's just like smiling, and he's just running around with it, and chuckling while he's wearing it. So there's a sense that maybe he was gay, because all that behavior back then was kind of seen as very effeminate, really. And definitely, in Arab culture, and also especially in English culture at that time, really, like if you're assumed to be homosexual, um, that you're out, and you could have actually been killed for that, or put in a psych ward for that, because people were very bigoted at the time. Um, and then the other thing too, in the film, is that I think that I want to talk a little bit about homosexuality. That I was a little confused at the very end. There, at the very end of the film, Lawrence is right by Damascus, and what happens is that he gets captured and he's beaten. And what happens is that one of the Turks actually was pinching his skin, and commenting on his skin. And then he headbutts them because he felt uncomfortable. And the guy's like smiling and flashing his teeth. And what happens is that they strip his shirt off, and they start beating him. And all the guards are kind of like smiling and grinning and stuff like that. So I think it was kind of implied that they kind of saw Lawrence maybe as a sexual character, you know, and that's why they kind of spared his life. Really, there was like probably a sense of maybe like masochism or sadism. And definitely, again, in the film like Lawrence of Arabia, especially in the early 1960s, having that featured was very controversial. You look at 1969 with Midnight Cowboy, where there's a scene with a character doing a homosexual act on another character, where this is just whipping somebody and suggesting that maybe these guys did that because they were men who fetishized Lawrence. And definitely featuring that in the film. If that is true, because it's based on his autobiography, Lawrence's autobiography, that's definitely very risky and very controversial. And the last thing that I'll say about this film is that it's an excellent film as far as capturing PTSD, because Lawrence has to make some tough choices. He has to in the first part of the film, he saves somebody from being lost in the desert. He's praised as a hero, and then this person kills another Arab from another group, really. So Lawrence is like, okay, everybody, we all have to work together. So since he killed, because in order to fight the Ottoman Empire and the Turks, what happened was he had to get different tribes of people together throughout Arabia to come together and fight. So, when these different tribes have an issue, that can lead to more bloodshed. So Lawrence was like, okay, well, since, he's part of your army, and he offended the other, since he's part of your Arab tribe and he offended the other Arab tribe, everybody agrees that he needs to be executed, because it's really an eye for an eye back then. But Lawrence said, I'm actually going to execute the law because I'm English. I'm not part of, there's no other English person here, so I'm part of my own tribe, basically. And he decides to just shoot this guy, and definitely, as he said, it was traumatizing because this is somebody that he helped, really. And then also too, he's getting a little bit of exposure to war. Just by actually, he has to actually kill somebody. And I think later on he kind of says that he actually really enjoyed it, so I think that, it's two things. I think on one side, it's traumatizing, and then on the other side, it's showing that, even though other people are doing the killing and Lawrence does stuff like blows up trains and other things like that, he's gonna see death, and he's gonna see death up front, and then also too, he's gonna be the taker of life, really. So, there's a difference between like the people who drop the atomic bomb. There's people who drop bombs and in military service, or they blow up things and they don't see the people and the fear and the consequences because they're so far away. But with Lawrence, he sees it up close and personal. There's another scene where he takes care of two Arab boys, and they're his servants, and one of them dies because of quicksand, and he has like he feels guilty because of that. It could be survivor's guilt, as they call it, but I don't think it's really that, because it's not like his life was in danger, really, but there's nothing he could do, so he feels guilt that he couldn't save that boy. And then the other thing that happens with Lawrence is that later in the film he gets shot at, and that traumatizes him. And later on in war, when he's in other like battles that he has, you see, like especially in Damascus, it's a very bloody battle. So I think that he's also really exposed to the violence. And also, like, when they showed Damascus, they showed that, like, I believe they definitely showed that the Turks they showed a village right by Damascus. So it's kind of clear that the Turks went to that village and they just killed everybody, and they were very barbaric. And it also showed like women like with some of their dresses torn. So maybe that was insinuating that they actually sexually assaulted women. Like honestly, like this was back then, people believed in that. So maybe what and then what happened was when they were in Damascus, what happened was there was this hospital. I think it only served 200 people, but they had 600 Turks there, and Lawrence was also in charge of that area, but he didn't really help them out really, and he was also kind of like chuckling and laughing and just going crazy. And I think that the reason why he did that was maybe he felt a need to punish them, so he kind of almost, you know, had a sense of, when he has to take people's lives, it gets to him. But also when he is in situations where he actually is killing somebody who's done wrong, really, I think that affects with his moral compass, really. And again, when he actually at the last scene when he's actually in charge of the hospital, he sees like dead bodies and people who are very skeletal, and there's this person following him around. You kind of question that's a hallucination or whatever. And there's also another scene in War where like his eyeballs are really wide and he's like shooting randomly at people, and he's not eating, and he's always like and sometimes in a state of just PTSD or a state of just like zoning out. Really, there's always a sense with him that it's really impacting him, and that's really important because a lot of films back then. They don't really show PTSD, and they don't really show that really at all. So it was definitely very avant-garde to showcase PTSD. I know, like, I think one of the most famous examples of PTSD in film are two films. It's The Deer Hunter with Christopher Walken's character. That's a great film. That's probably like a more clearer film about PTSD and the consequences. And then also Full Metal Jacket, where you actually see, Private Pyle in the U.S. military dealing with abuse and hazing and emotional abuse, and then he has a breakdown, really. But Lawrence Arabia was kind of hit that in the early 60s, where those films hit that in like the late 70s and then also the late 80s, really. So it was definitely very avant-garde for that reason. I would say that a little bit about the film, that I would say is that it's definitely very well very well paced. I will say that you watch the film, it really, when you watch the trailers for this film, you really get like amped to watch the whole film because of like the beautiful desert landscapes, all the action and the adventure and stuff like that. When you watch the film, it's really well told. There's like three parts. The first part is Lawrence's death, which starts at the beginning of the film. He's actually riding his motorcycle. There are kids in the road. He turns, and then what happens is he dies. He just turns it off the road to spare them, and then he dies. And then what happens is that it cuts to the first part of the film where he goes from Cairo, Egypt, to getting an Arab army and getting people together, and then invading Akbar, and then getting like support from the English, from the British Empire to actually do more fighting and violence. That's like part one. And then the second part of the movie is from that point where he gets more support all the way to when he's in Damascus, and he's actually just he has a level of leadership, and he's not doing that good of a job. Unfortunately, I had to pee at the very end of the film, so I didn't watch the very end. I don't remember how the movie ends, but it was like the last 5 minutes. But he was in Damascus, and he was helping like the Arab tribes and everybody just put that place together. But what I would say is that the cinematography is excellent, and I think, and also too, that they do a lot of great editing. I mean, there's a lot of smash cuts, jump cuts. When people are talking, they have a good way of just cutting. I was showing reaction shots, meaning that if something's going on in a film, like Lawrence is killing somebody, they may show like the faces of other people. There's this famous cut where Lawrence is talking to one of the Arab tribe leaders, and they show they do a crossfade to this little girl, and she has like this very serious look, and it's at nighttime. And then they kind of show all the other Arab people just like watching Lawrence have a conversation with this guy, and that's a good scene because it throws you off. Like, why are they focusing on this little girl? But also, it's at nighttime, so it does look a little like, okay, you're going from this really beautiful desert scene to this really dark scene, but then it's actually showing you that it's at nighttime. It's a mix of cutting to a reaction shot and then a crossfade to nighttime, and then also as Cooper kind of talked about in films that sometimes the best way to cut a film is to cut in something interesting, and they usually do that within this movie a lot. So like the editing is very strong, the sound design is strong. There's a scene in the begin, and there's a scene in the beginning of the movie where the Arabs are actually just losing their shit really because they're being bombed by Turkish planes, and you hear like the engine of the plane, you hear the bombs. There are plenty of scenes where they're running on horseback and camels, and you just hear like the rumbling of the feet and everything like that, and just like a lot of like guns and everything going off. Really, like it really has really excellent sound design. It's definitely very meticulously done. And also too, like the cinematography is really beautiful. It may and it's also it doesn't feel pretentious. It feels like they cut to these landscapes because they want you to show like all the things that he had to endure and also cross through. But also sometimes when you have something that's said that's insightful or raises the stakes for Lawrence, they want you to cut. They cut away to that stuff. They cut away to the desert and other landscapes because you actually really want to show. They want to give you a point to kind of digest what's being said, really. You know, and that's very important in filmmaking because the problem is that if you kind of cut from something really seriously said to another really serious thing being said, it's not as impactful. You have to kind of let the message kind of sit there for a while. I also feel that it's not like The Revenant, the Leonardo DiCaprio film, because I felt like in that film they kind of were overly showing the winter frontier and the winter landscape. I think of Lawrence of Arabia, I think they do a better job of saying, you know what, we're showing you these environments to give you a breather because Lawrence has higher stakes to take care of, to overcome and deal with. So we want that to resonate with you. I think that's done as like a way for the audience to kind of absorb what's being said and also show the environments that he had to overcome, which was a lot of desert landscapes, walking through miles of just rocky terrain. Some people were barefoot, and then also understanding that sometimes what was best for them was that they had to cross through Arabia and other deserts at nighttime. Because there was because it's not as hot, and they had to deal with desert dust storms, and they had to deal with like desert tornadoes. And then when I think at the end where Omar Sharif and Peter O'Toole were going into Arabia, they know we're going towards Damascus. You saw like all the snow and the snow blowing all over this place because some people don't realize that some parts of the desert it does snow, so it was cool to capture all that. But it really did a great job of using cinematography instead of just being pretentious and elongating the film unnecessarily. The only bad thing about the film is that I'm not sure what it was like in 1962 when they aired this, but it does feel like two movies. Like it does feel like a part one and a part two. Just like when you watch Full Metal Jacket, like the first part of Full Metal Jacket, it is from the beginning of the film all the way to the end of boot camp, and then the second part is Vietnam and their experience in Vietnam. If you watch this film, the first part is it's a three-part film actually. The first part's Lawrence passing away, but that gets you in the mood of just okay, we feel sorry for this guy because he spared somebody's life. He spared lives of kids by not running them off the road or whatever. And then the second part, which is the best part of the film, is him going to him invading Aqaba, like going to the sea and actually invading that land. And then the third part, which I think is the weakest part of the film, is him going from him going to Damascus and and that's that really. Because I think like and I think if you even stopped it at him going to Akabar, I think that would you had a great film. I think the second part of the film, it's just like you have like 100 minutes left in the movie, and you've already kind of seen a majority of the film really. So it does kind of feel like maybe it does kind of feel like what you like this and you're kind of holding your patience. But I also feel like the second part of the film, you already see him kind of accomplish this really great thing. Go from an ordinary to an extraordinary person. So this other part feels more like kind of like an epilogue, really. Just we're seeing like a little bit about him being extraordinary. And as I said, I didn't see the end of the film, but if it really ended with him just in Damascus, that wouldn't have been good. I think it should have ended with him, just actually being dismissed or being removed and going home and then just reflecting on his life. That would probably be the best way to end it, even if that took like a little bit longer, like an extra like 20-25 minutes. Really, it would have felt more complete, really, because it would have felt more like a tragedy film. Like you see this guy who becomes this great big war hero. You've seen how this has had impact on his psychology, and then being removed from that situation, like becoming a citizen. Because in tragedies, that's what it is. It's you have everything, and then you actually are, and you have nothing at the end, really. Showing like like he sacrificed his sanity. So I do think that that would have been the better way to end it, really. But I don't believe that that's how the film ends. But I don't believe that's how the film ends. I think it just ends with them in Damascus and they cut it, because I understand too, like even though this film's like 220 minutes and it was made at a time where people had tolerance for long films, having an extra, like making it like 4 hours or whatever, that was a big risk because the audience could be like, okay, this is just too boring. Because honestly, too, that's the other thing too, because this is a very hard film to watch. It's very, very long. And it came out at the right time when people had tolerance for long films. Because Ben-Hur was 1959, it was the longest, and Gone with the Wind was 1939. So, these super long films, it's a very big risk. Like people talk about Cleopatra, and I believe that was like the early 1960. 1963 or 1964 was Cleopatra, but that film almost tanked. That tanked and didn't do well in the box office because it was way too long, really. So that could have happened with Lawrence of Arabia. People could have said, okay, that's just too damn long of a film. But I also appreciate the intermission because that honestly makes you, because they do intermissions very well with these films. Like obviously, like you want to like a good intermission's two-thirds into the movie or a little bit more, just so you feel like okay, the remaining part's not that much really. But it was also weird when I watched the last part of the film. It's like 100 minutes, and then it went by really, really quickly. It felt like it went by in 5 minutes, But like the acting was really strong in this film. I think what people don't remember is that To Kill a Mockingbird with Gregory Peck was it won Best Acting that year. But a lot of people kind of felt that it was a film injustice. Like Peter O'Toole should have won this, especially for how much harder the role was. Like spending years filming Lawrence of Arabia, and whereas Gregory Peck was filming To Kill a Mockingbird, and even though his acting is great and it's a very important film, definitely Lawrence of Arabia he endured a lot. That role was a lot more harder. And Peter O'Toole had to do a lot more like physically demanding stuff. Really, it was actually interesting because Omar Sharif started Doctor Zhivago. They wanted Peter O'Toole to do that, but Peter O'Toole just says like, no, I can't do that because it was too much for me, especially since he did Lawrence of Arabia. But more than likely, because of Oscar politics, they probably would have given him the Oscar for that role, just because. With Oscars, sometimes they do that. They may be like, oh, we accidentally missed it one year, but we want to give it to you another year. You just have to do another strong role. Or you look at somebody like Leonardo DiCaprio. Like, he had to do a bunch of good films before they gave him an Oscar. So, so it's definitely really sad because, Peter O'Toole's a really great actor. And this role is very timeless. I mean, if you look at film history, To Kill a Mockingbird is an important film, but it's not had the legacy of Lawrence of Arabia. If you think of any film from 1962, the most famous films are, I think number one is Lawrence Arabia, number two is Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, and number three would be To Kill a Mockingbird. But more people, I think, know about Lolita than To Kill a Mockingbird, and then also more, most people know about Lawrence Arabia than both those films, really. So it's definitely it's definitely one of the great film injustices. But Oscars are always very competitive. But I do want to kind of just say that just to wrap it up, it's a very great film. It's a great film that talks about really the power of looking at people as people and not people as inferior cultures, or what happens when people come together for a goal, really, because a lot of times in history that really happened, where people were supposed to come together and fight big battles. And sometimes, like even World War II, they had segregated armies and they looked down at like black soldiers and other things. But then there were places where people just said, no, if we have to work together and survive together, or we're gonna die together, and and then just embrace everybody, really. So there is a huge sense of camaraderie and teamwork, and getting past differences and actually accomplishing things. I think that's one of the big themes. And I think the second big theme is the consequences of war in regards to PTSD. And also the other big thing about war is that being being a deconstructionism. Like war is not. It's not about Lawrence conquering lands or being this great hero like Alexander the Great. It's also not about him just going through a film and just shooting guns and just being like, yay, I'm not actually seeing the dead bodies, I'm not witnessing all these horrible things. He's actually exposed to it, so it has an effect on his psychology. The same way you watch the movie Mulan. What happened in the movie Mulan? They all were singing and they did these musical scores, and it was a very this upbeat film. And then it cuts to actually them seeing the village all destroyed from war, ravaged by war. So it's good to have these types of films that show that, okay, even though he's regarded as this great big war hero, he suffered psychologically for what he had to endure, really. So it's unfortunate that we exist in a world with wars. Wars are very consequential as far as people losing lives, people being wounded. It was also told that there were some situations where there were some soldiers and that also happened to him too. Like one of the kids he took care of, he had he had I think a cartridge in his pocket. I'm not sure if it went off or something like that, or no, a detonator. I'm not sure if it went off or it pierced this kid and caused an infection because he rolled down a hill, and it looked like he had some damage carrying a cartridge. And what they said is that, oh well, we had to euthanize him, meaning that they had to shoot him in the head, really, because they're like, okay, we can't have him be captured because they're gonna torture and do way worse for them if they find him, because of the Geneva Convention saying that people who are captured who are Arabs are not part of are outside the Geneva Convention, so they can do just like these really hellish things and stuff like that. So I do think that it's important to show that, obviously, also too, that there are many people who died that way as well. And like once you were wounded, you were seen as a burden and not somebody to take care of. In regards to how Lawrence handled the Turks and the wounded Turks in Damascus, but also in this situation where he was told that he had to kill, this orphan boy that he really fathered. He actually fathered two orphan boys. One died in quicksand, the other one carried an explosive charge, and he rolled down a desert landscape. They didn't show if the charge actually hurt his body, but it was implied that the detonator it may have went off, and it may have cut his skin or something like that and caused an infection, and they had to euthanize him. It's all implied. You have to put your heads together to kind of get it and stuff like that. But I do want to say that, very lastly, Lawrence Arabia is a very hard film to review because of its length, really. And then, I saw it, again, when in my earlier 20s, when I really just, I always had a hard time reading and comprehending things when I was younger. My brain would just be a little impatient. But at 37, I'm happy that I can present you guys, this review. me to really just understand the film a lot more and do some research before watching this film, just to make sure I kind of contextualized it. You know, it's a very excellent film, definitely one of the greatest films ever made. It rightfully so is in 10th place as the best greatest film of all time. And American films. Like number one was The Godfather. Number two is, I know number one is actually Citizen Kane. Number two is The Godfather. I believe number three is like Gone with the Wind, but and number 10 is like Lawrence of Arabia. But they've changed the list throughout the years. I think they say Pulp Fiction. It wasn't. It was like it was like 94 on that list, but now it's like and it's like gone down that list. So it's considered more as a great film and stuff like that, really, But this is one of the all-time great films. It's also considered like the greatest epic film and one of the greatest war films, one of the greatest adventure films ever made, really. And I believe in Britain they say like because David Lean was a British director, this is probably the second greatest or third greatest British film. Number one was considered Vertigo for a very long time, really. So yeah, this is definitely it stands the test of time. Even 2024, 1962, 62 after its release, it's still drawing a bigger audience than a lot of the films you're seeing in theaters today. So it's definitely stands the test of time as the greatest one of the greatest films ever made. Definitely one of the most ambitious films ever made, and definitely very avant-garde and capturing themes of the importance of people coming together, PTSD, psychological damage, and that also war was fought by people who were considered, outcasts and eccentric, and they had to be accepted because honestly, they're the ones that were able to win wars like Lawrence of Arabia.